Hey everybody, Milo here, along with Zach Gully,
Thanks for having me.
our fitness trainer here at Superstition Mountain and also for Milo Lines Golf. And today we have an awesome video about hip rotation and flexion.
All right.
I wanted to introduce a three-part series that I recently filmed here at the gym at Superstition Mountain with Zach Gully, the fitness coach for Milo Lines Academy, as well as Superstition Mountain's lead fitness instructor. In this three-part series, we cover some exercises to help you feel better, move better, and learn to swing like an athlete. So let's dive in to this awesome series.
All right, Milo, and we're going to cover some exercises to improve hip rotation and get you guys being able to really turn athletically through your swing. I always start with the main components of hip rotation, and one is going to be the depth at which the hips move back. A second is going to be, can you actually segment the pelvis away from the rib cage? And if there's issues with both of those are the first two places I go to address. As we do many times in our schools and with our students, we're always teaching a hip hinge type of exercise. So that's the first place I start. And with the player, I may just have them do the test itself, which is going to be something where they're moving their hips backwards. And as a coach, I'm looking down the line, making sure that their pelvis is in fact creating some distance where it's translating backwards. I'm looking for like 6 inches to a foot. And can they do that without their spine gaining inflection? So the first key to this is getting the pelvis to translate back without much spine flexion or rounding. People that have problems with this, you see a lot of bending happening with the upper body, and or there's just no weight shift back. If that is you and you have a hard time moving back like that, we may need to look at mobility exercises for the hip. So first place I will start is on your back and doing a leg raise back up like this. People that have issues with hip hinge, they might have length issues on the back of their leg. So if you're taking your leg up and you are getting to like this area and it feels like it's got nowhere to go, this is the first place you need to start. Yeah. So the more of these we do, right, it starts working back further. There's muscles on the front of your leg. You may experience some cramping with that, but that's not a bad thing. We need to make the hamstring or the backside of the leg be inhibited by the muscles on the front activating. That is a very useful tool we can use to get muscles and tissues to open up. Hey Milo, I had you grab a golf club here, and I want you to see and understand why this hamstring length is important for the golf swing itself. Looking at you down the line, what we see all the elite players do, take this thing up to the top. As they start to transition down, you see some type of squat or hinge. We like to call it a flexion of the pelvis.
Yes.
Gaining in hip flexion. And what's happening is this butt is moving backwards, which is then creating more length on the backside of his leg. So this is why this is important. Let's say that you're a player that cannot do this like leg raise, or you have a hard time doing this hinge. Take one up for me. And as I want you to make a transition where your pelvis does not actually gain inflection. So you're going to see some type of unloading of the tissue of the back of the leg that's going to cause a shooting forward of the pelvis. And that's really what we're trying to avoid. So a lot of these early extension issues we see are because of patterning loading into tissues that are probably a little bit too tight. The second you load a tissue, it's going to want to unload. So if you're loading tissue that only has, let's say, like this amount of range of motion, you load it up and you're going to shoot it back forward. So the best players in the world, their hips move back, they gain hip flexion, and most of them, or I would argue all of them, can do a hip hinge with very good success.
So every day on the lesson tee,
Yeah.
this is kind of one of the most common things I see. And I've created some interesting exercises using hockey sticks.
I love that.
And things along those lines to help players feel what it feels like to add that hip hinge or that flexion in transition. And for everybody, it feels extremely strange at first. But I find a lot of it has to do with just patterning the coordination, because a lot of people that's not something that they're used to doing. So even though they may lack mobility somewhat like me, there are ways around it if they learn to coordinate it correctly.
Yeah, if they can get the patterning moving in the right way. One thing I've always done in my career is teach this hip hinge. And can I borrow this for a second? Mm-hmm. I've always spent a lot of time working on finding the best way to teach this. And I've done things like putting the golf club on your back. It's very hard for some people with shoulder mobility. Maybe using a weight in the front. But the best way I've found is to put a golf club or a stick, a dowel, whatever, on your forehead, on your stomach, and as close to your belt buckle as you can. And doing a pattern where you're maintaining those points of contact while you're creating a depth backwards.
Early extenders, this one's for you, AKA just about every one of us. We need to learn how to hinge. We need to learn how to hinge in different angles. We need to learn how to rotate and get back into your hinge. So here's backswing and then back into the hinge that we were working on. This will take you out of early extension, allow you to stay down through the ball.
I think this goes hand in hand with the patterning you're talking about. Because if we add rotation, let's say we do a one where we turn and then hinge, that's going to look very similar, I think, to your hockey stick turn and hinge.
Yes.
So the way I teach it is we go first straight forward, and then we start implementing rotation while hinging. And we're going to do that both ways. And the key with this is not letting the upper body move out this way. In the golf swing, if you're ever working with the player and their backswing looks like that, do you like that?
Hard to recover from there.
It's hard to get out of that. So we can try to influence some of these patterns with hinging or with the work you're doing in the gym. If you have the proper alignment, or if you're focusing on making sure that it looks similar to what you're working on with your golf swing.
Yeah, I actually find players make the fastest progress when they are using the same patterns under some load in the gym. Their muscles get used to it. They actually make progress quicker. So Zach, everybody's wanting to get that more rotary pattern, and you've shown us hip hinge basically without rotation. You know, you've created rotation and hip hinge, no rotation, and then backwards rotation and hip hinge, but really there's no rotation happening during it.
Yeah.
How do we tie this together?
So the hip hinge portion is the gaining and flexion or pelvis moving away. Where the hip separation's really happening is going to be at the top with transition, and with players that lack hip dissociation, this is a skill that we need to learn. So I worked with some really high-level players. They come to me and they're really good, and their hips don't move at all. And it's just kind of shocking to me, but they have adequate amount of little separation. And I've worked with other players that you ask them to do something like this, and their pelvis is all over the place. So this is step one, is just creating an exercise where you have stability, where you're in somewhat of a pelvic tilt, and you're creating some separation of the pelvis from the torso. The reason why this is important is because as we go up to the top, create our little hip hinge, and start to get moving into the downswing, my shoulders need to be able to lag, maybe for a decent word, or stay a little bit back, so that way we can get some shallowing mechanisms to happen. And that's coming from the pelvis starting to create a little rotation first.
And one of the interesting things I find, if a player winds themselves up and then begins to go into flexion, naturally the pelvis wants to unwind some amount. Mm-hmm. And so a lot of that is you get it for free. You don't actually, if you move correctly, you don't have to try to turn the hips. Yeah. The hips, when I flex, the hips naturally just turn and re-square.
So really what I'm looking for is not to gain the ability to rip the hips and turn them. I'm just looking for some freedom to do exactly that. I'm thinking of it, we're trying to get a segment below the torso to move freer. So it's not a pattern where you're trying to whip them and really turn them. It's just to create more effortless freedom. Yeah. So Milo, I got you with this orange stick, and I just want you to try to create a pattern that's similar to your golf swing. And what I want everybody to recognize is go back up to the top. As you start working down, start going down, the pelvis is moving backwards. The upper body is maintaining some lag, maybe for a better term. As you turn down, the pelvis creates some freedom, and you start to see this little bend happen in the right side of lower
And that's
back.
because
That's the
upper and lower are
yeah,
separating
they're
slightly.
separating. Yeah, the way the spine works, as you start creating rotation, it's facilitated with side bend. So that's why it's important that we have this ability to turn the pelvis so that it allows things to naturally bend in the proper way up the chain.
All right, Zach, so you've got 3 main exercises to accomplish this task. These are exercises we do at golf schools. You do them with clients here at the fitness center. Kind of walk us through what are the main 3 exercises.
Yeah, so first is going to be creating a pattern that facilitates or allows you to create a better hip hinge.
Okay.
So it could be like a mobility exercise for hip flexion. So opening up tissues on the back sides of your body.
Okay.
The second is the patterning part of hip hinge itself. So we got the stick and we're creating a hinging type of motion, a flexing type of motion with something that gives you some feedback about your spine not rounding or flexing. That's the key. And then the third is being able to create some pelvic rotation or separation.
It's a little disassociation of upper and lower, right?
Yeah. And this is all it really needs to be. It doesn't need to be anything crazy. You don't need to go super fast, but you do need to have that pattern. So these are 3 like very simple exercises you guys could do on a daily basis. Maybe spend, I don't know, 3 to 6 minutes, and I guarantee you're going to start to see some change with how your pelvis moves through your downswing and through your golf swing.
Hopefully you liked this video and you learned something. If you did, hit the like and subscribe button. Also come visit us at milolinesgolf.com, where we'll teach you how to swing like an athlete. And if you need any one-on-one coaching with Zach, you can find him there.